Video games like Crusader Kings, Europa Universalis or Assassin's Creed. We all love them, but within history, are they useful? Can one learn history from video games? Or do they distort the past with falsehoods and anachronisms? This may be an unpopular opinion, but for me, video games can help the field of history immensely, even more though than other mass media products. So this is what this video will be about: the historical video game and its benefits for history as a field of study. But first, you have to know what I'm talking about here. Obviously, I'm not talking about every video game there is. Games like Doom or Mortal Kombat, although being great at what they are, do contribute to the field that is history, the same as my cat does. That is to say, exactly nothing. Therefore, when I talk about video games in this video, I will be talking about the historical video game. But what is a historical video game, I hear you ask? Well, it's obviously a video game that is historical. No, just kidding. A game to be considered a historical video game has to fulfill 4 points. First, it has to be truthful. That means that the game in question has to have an iconography and textual content that is close to what we currently know of the specific historical period. For example, in Stronghold Crusaders, you just can't use F-15 bombers to bomb Saladin's positions into dust. That wouldn't be truthful, wouldn't it? Second, the game must be plausible. This means that the game cannot be considered a historical video game if it does not keep the essence of veracity, with the appearance of orcs, magics, dragons or other medieval fantasy iconography. That means certainly Skyrim is not a historical video game. Third, it has to inform the player about aspects of the past. Exactly like movies and historical novels, video games add information to the general idea we have of the past. But in the case of video games, there is the possibility of introducing specific methods for persons who are playing video games to learn about a topic in particular, by integrating mechanics that give the player the possibility of expanding their knowledge about some aspects of the past that is connected to the game, such as the Civilopedia in Civilizations, for example. But it does not have to be an encyclopedia. Simple unit descriptions or biographies count as well. And the fourth point, this is the obvious one, in order to be considered a historical video game, it has to be a game. That means it has to be interactive. A player must play with it and not only watch it. That means that every game that checks these 4 conditions can be considered a historical video game. So just to give you some examples for some historical video games that have come out recently. There's a game I'm very fond of, The Great War, The Western Front. There's also Pediment, Victoria 3, Knights of Honor 2 and Company of Heroes 3, just to name a few. And also to note that to be considered a historical video game, it does not have to be good. Now that we know what a historical video game is, how do they help the field of study that is history to advance? For someone with a passion for history, like I am, and you probably too, it is hard to accept it. But at least from my point of view, most of society does not care about history, beyond some facts to be proud of. It is seen as something that has apparently some use in academia, but nothing more than that. Because of this, most of society learns their notion of the past from mandatory education. And from media, of course. But video games carry a stigma that historical novels and historical films do not seem to carry. That of being bad for education, full stop. Possibly due to video games being a relatively speaking new medium. And tell me in the comments if this has happened to you in your school days. The teacher, possibly because he or she does not want to give classes today, just put some historical film on. In my case it was 1492, which is pretty bad. Now imagine this happening in some other subject. Imagine the chemistry teacher putting Breaking Bad on for you to learn something about chemistry That would be great actually. Although you would be learning much about the social economic states of the United States in the 2000s, but you wouldn't learn much about chemistry, am I right? And now imagine you, history teacher, giving you 1 hour of playing Crusader Kings 2 when the class subject is feudalism, for example. That would be great, and I'm pretty sure that you would learn much about feudalism. Even more so, I guess, than what you would learn from normal classes. And there are more and more studies that focus on the applications that video games may have in education. And in these studies, it has been possible to demonstrate that certain video games help and develop historical thinking skills. Skills on which historical education should be focused on, and not only on memorizing some arbitrary dates. And hey, I have a video about that. Up there should be a link for it. But what are these historical thinking skills? Well, there are 6 of them. First, one has to be capable of establishing historical significance. The second is you have to be capable of using primary sources as evidence. The third is you have to identify continuity and change. The fourth is you have to be capable of analyzing cause and consequences. The fifth is that one has to be capable of taking a historical perspective. And the sixth and last one is one has to be capable of understanding ethical dimensions and historical interpretations. These points are pretty self-explanatory, but they are necessary to end teaching history, like I think most of us have gone through. So, how do video games come into the mix? Well, games usually teach some, and if done right, all of these historical thinking skills. Most of them establish that an event is historical significant by choosing the same beach on D-Day to land on. No, just kidding. By taking part in an event, even if it's only in a game, the player can get a sense of how important an event in history is. Maybe the one skill that is the most difficult to implement is the use of primary sources. But things like getting to read real letters, hear real speeches, or even just to see real photographs or paintings gets the player in touch with the real history, and maybe they seek out more after playing. How many of you have played a great historical game and you wanted just to absorb every aspect of that time after leaving the game? I know that is exactly what happened to me many times. Also, at least for me, it happens the other way around. Every time I read about World War II, I get an urge to play Heart of Iron 4. And well, if you have to do a master paper about World War II, well, you get some hours in. Of course you can get curious about the past through other media, but the big difference to movies and novels is that games are interactive, and that makes it way easier to integrate the possibility of learning some aspects of history. But games have the same problem as movies, that of being a product that has to be, in the case of games, be played. And a game that is totally historically accurate maybe or even probably will be a bad game, or at least it will be more difficult to make an interesting game. Balancing this, the accuracy and the playability of historical games is the real challenge for the place of historical video games in the field of history, in my opinion at least. So in conclusion, in my opinion, although some games can distort in some way the assumed reality of history, due to them being a product that has to sell after all, they are still a great way for people to get some of their historical notions, and more importantly, their curiosity regarding history. And hey, maybe even some of those players who have been growing up with these historical video games will be curious enough to learn more about some topic, and maybe even start a career in this field, which is great. But what do you think? Do historical video games help history, or do they do more harm than good? Please write it into the comments if you want to. And if you want to learn about why the meme king Charles II of Spain wasn't that bad of a king, as you maybe have been thinking, watch this video here. Thank you for watching and bye!